an A player, they always find a way to get it done, regardless of what it is, and they're able to think outside the box to do so. It passes the eyeball test every time. I've been in sales now for the better part of 12 years. I'm in my fourth role as a VP of sales. So I've started as a ground floor seller, prospecting, partner selling, the whole nine. Worked my way through the system at a major Fortune 200 company, was a sales trainer. So I went deeper into the science of sales and what makes top people top people.
Okay.
And then a couple years of frontline leadership. And like I said, since then, various types of VPs of sales roles.
Okay, awesome. And what was the Fortune 200 company?
AVP.
AVP, nice. Fantastic. So you're going to be very well placed then to discuss this topic, I imagine. So let's start off with what defines an A player. Maybe let's start off with personality traits, and then we can move into metrics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I asked my first manager one time what makes an A player, and it rings true today. And it's not the best answer in a sense that it's not as specific as a metric, which I can get into, but ultimately, end results are the obvious answer here. And he described it as the X factor. So an A player, they always find a way to get it done, regardless of what it is, and they're able to think outside the box to do so. So that's really, in my opinion, is an A player. It passes the eyeball test every time.
Brilliant. So give me maybe some examples of people you've worked with who've had those characteristics and traits.
Sure. So I would say, the main difference between an A and a B player too is, an A player, they realize their full potential now. So people that I've actually worked with, they always find a way to hit their monthly target. And if they're not going to hit their monthly target, they look at the metrics that lead to those. So it's very little leadership from the manager or the leader. And they will go out and they'll break themselves to hit their goals because they want it for themselves more than anything. And it's a great thing to have.
Awesome. Fantastic. How do you turn the process of maybe turning in like a B player into an A player or a C player into a B player, something that's tangible and coachable? In your time, from your experiences, how have you done this?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely regular coaching, no matter how good the results are. So the specific tangible thing that I would use is the situational leadership.
Okay.
So if you just Google situational leadership, there's a very basic, it's like a 4-square analysis or D1, D2, D3, D4. It's basically how good they are in a certain situation. So what a lot of people do is they forget that top people want to be challenged. They want to be improved. And the mistake that a lot of leaders make is that there's A players that have very basic skills that are not the best. So you have to look at how good somebody is in the moment. So I mentioned end results. An A player is going to hit their targets most months or blow out their number during the busy season. And then you go and say, well, let me see your demo. And you realize their demo is not as good as someone that's been there 3 months. So the tangible thing that a leader can do is really focus on what are they good at and what are they not good at. And the top person is typically the most coachable as well. So they're more than happy to take that feedback.
Okay, awesome. And we discussed previously about, how is it possible? Is an A player just a mentality that people are born with or nurtured before they even arrive at a company, and then they just have that mentality of I want to dominate, I want to be the best, and they get there? Have you had instances, and if so, like maybe some examples of that, where people have joined you at like a C player, like not great, not hitting their target, and they've somehow turned it around to not only become a B player, but also an A player?
Absolutely. Yeah. It really comes down to maximizing people's potential. And that's what I was saying, the difference between an A player and a B player is that the A player is realizing their potential now. There's plenty of people that have, their eyes are bigger than their stomach is what I would say. And that, I'm going to be the best salesperson. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But they don't even know where to begin. So you could have a B or a C player join your team, join your organization, whether it's business or sports or some other competitive environment, and they need someone to bring it out of them, whether it's a leader, whether it's a culture of competitiveness, but also supportive that they didn't have at their previous job, right? So I've seen it where, I'll give an example. There was one person in particular that was at a company,
Yeah.
and he didn't have a frontline leader. So he was basically, they were like, hey, go develop this market. So I came in as a VP and I was the frontline leader for a few months. But the big difference was I was able to bring in a frontline leader immediately that brought out the best in this person. So this individual went from being a C player, probably at the very bottom, bottom 5% of the organization, was on written warning to be pushed out of the organization because of almost 2 years of extreme underperformance. But when they had someone come in that believed in them and gave them structure and gave them coaching, then they went on the following year to be a President's Club performer out of the entire organization. He went from the bottom 5% to top 5%. And that was simply getting someone that believed in them and, did the situational leadership. And one day at a time, you get better at your gaps.
That's so interesting. So I'd like to go into slightly more depth here. So, this topic you can easily just discuss, right? A players have mentality and it's solely down to the individual, but leadership is super, super important, right? How important is, have you had maybe wasted potential where you've seen some reps who have been, had great potential, but just necessarily in another team who haven't had that leadership or the leadership style that they required to perform?
So how do you identify someone that's not realizing their potential?
Yeah, and like maybe on the point of leadership is so important, and have you seen examples where the leadership just hasn't been there for other reps and they've suffered from that?
All the time. I mean, I've been guilty of it myself.
Okay.
And when I talk about success stories, it's not necessarily something I did, right? It's about setting them up for success. And if you're a VP and you have frontline leaders, it really is the job of the frontline leader to get the most out of their A players. So, plenty of times underperformance is fixable. You just have to know exactly what you're looking for that role to be successful. So someone could be at a company in a very similar sales role, but there's a major difference at the new company where they realize their full potential. And a lot of times it's just a better leader. And I think right now you see a lot of people leaving jobs because of, companies are growing this time of year, especially in the fall. Companies have money to spend and budget to use up.
Yeah.
So you got these, big offers. And whenever someone's trying to leave an organization, it's good that you have a transparent relationship with your team where they can come to you and say, hey, I got an offer. But a key thing that I'll always challenge them on is, well, I'm not, if you're going to leave for a much better opportunity and we can't match it, that's okay. But have you looked at the leader that you're going to be working for directly? Because that's usually when someone either takes off or fails.
Interesting. So like with leadership, I guess there's multiple ways we can do this, but what are some of the fundamental ways of being a leader who motivates his or her reps?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that as a leader, people want to be treated like people, right? They have families, they have lives, they have good days and bad days aside from work. And as a new leader, especially as a new frontline leader, I was very tone deaf to that. So I learned the hard way a lot of times. So I'll be the first to admit it. But it's amazing how far it goes when you're like, hey, you know what? Why don't you take the day off? You don't have to, put in PTO and just, go be with your wife today or go be with your husband today. It happens all the time. So they like to see those little things that show that you care about them as a person. And that also could be a catalyst for someone being like, okay, I'm comfortable here. I realize my full potential of this company. Yeah,
I think, it's so important for reps, especially, to feel like they're valued. And it can be quite easy to, we were discussing before, like seeing reps as a way of making money and like work, when actually it goes a long way to give them a break and show them that they are humans and they do have families, right?
And to go a step further, so you have that aspect, but I can think very specifically of teams, especially as a frontline leader. I had 2 top performers that were 65% of my team's performance that year. And the two of them they had those similarities because they were tenacious, perseverant, all those great qualities of A players, but very different ways of motivating. One of them was a football player, and he's like, honestly, get in my face and tell me that I'm terrible, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted the hard truth. And then my other top performer, she was completely different. She just wanted you to tell her that she was great, because she was phenomenal. She worked hard. They both worked hard. They were both great, talent, but the way that they wanted to be motivated was differently. So if you can bond and connect with, all of your teammates, it's much easier to identify who the A players are and then how to motivate them.
That's a great point. Well, I love that story also, because, like saying, an A player mentality may think that it's just like work, and they need to be, they have a certain way of working, but in reality it's very different. When did you realize that having different approaches to different reps yielded different rewards and greater rewards?
When I had a turnover, my first time being a frontline leader, because I made the mistake of thinking that there's only one way to be successful, and that's the way that I was successful, right? So, at the time I was doing a bunch of cold calling and I was challenging people, and I was really good at that. But then you inherit a team, and there's people who get business from partners, or, not just the way that I got my business. So when people weren't being successful the way that I thought they needed to be or wanted them to be, they would just leave my team. So I learned that the hard way, and that was a very long time ago, by the way, for the record.
Thank you for sharing that. And another question would be, how often does an A player come around, a truly an A player? And yeah, let's start with that first, and I have a few other questions surrounding that.
It's rare, because again, there's a lot of people with potential, but the A players are the ones that recognize it, realize it, capitalize on it, and produce month in and month out. A good example is, look at pro sports. Everyone looks at professional sports as, oh, everyone's millionaires. Well, regardless of what sport you're watching, whether it's soccer or North American football, right, or baseball or different sports, it's really the top 5 or 10% are the ones that are making lifetime money that sets up generations and generations of people.
Yep.
So, you look at these owners of these clubs and these teams, and they're dishing out sometimes $500 million for one person. And from a business perspective, it might make sense. There's also advertising, but there's a reason why these top 5 or 10 athletes in a given sport are A players. But then it makes you think about how many millions of people play the sport. And if the top 1% of the top 1% get to play professionally, and then think about the top 10 people of that small number, it's extremely rare to find someone that's a game changer in any sport or business.
I love the sports analogies. I watched quite a lot of Michael Jordan, the documentary he did over lockdown, and for example, he's an A player, right? And what I realized was, okay, Michael Jordan on the court was super important to the team. He won the many games, but aside from performing and like a rep, aside from bringing in, selling, making deals and all that, they drive the performance of other people who look up at them. Do you find that in teams you've worked with A reps, like they've been superb for just like the gold standard and motivating other reps and seeing, not necessarily being, the noisiest in the room, but just performance wise?
Yeah, I think Michael Jordan is the example of this. So it's a great person there to mention.
Yeah.
Last Dance documentary was obviously very popular during COVID.
Yeah.
I actually have a Michael Jordan quote right here on my wall.
Okay.
If has a price, leadership has a price. I pushed people when they didn't want to be pushed. I challenged them when they didn't want to be challenged. But I never asked them to do something I wasn't willing to do myself.
Yeah.
So you think about, Michael Jordan is, in my opinion, the best athlete that I ever watched, for so many reasons beyond just what he did on the court. He led by example. Everyone knew it. And if you got traded to the Bulls, it's Mike's team, and you knew it, and you were going to live up to his standard, which was relentless. And 95% of Michael Jordan's greatness, unfortunately, is something that no one will ever see unless you're his teammate. So, an A player, in terms of business, again, I don't necessarily equate an A player as the person that's the top producer every time as well. Sometimes the top producer could be toxic. They could, I've seen it where the best person in a big team lowers the bar for everyone else. It could be greed. They take all the leads. They use their power to manipulate leaders that are weak to get more for them. And it really hurts the overall culture of the team. And they say a rising tide lifts all ships, but I don't know what the opposite expression is, but it's very suppressing when there's a selfish top performer. So an A player is someone that can be a top producer, but also not at the expense of the team. So,
Okay.
plenty of examples where, I mentioned the two people earlier. One was a football player and one, she just wanted to be recognized. So one way you can kill two birds with one stone is during our busy season, we called it selling season. It was a very defined amount of time. She was very successful in that, and she had a very specific game plan. And one of the perks of being a top person on my team is I know you were busy, and if you didn't want to go to all the team meetings that we had because they needed to go sell, I get it. But if you bring them in as a special guest and say, here's my strategy, here's how I do it, or bring them in as a training opportunity for a bigger group, she took that as, she was very flattered. And then she's just teaching her team for you how to do it the best way, and it's real. And then people see it happening, just like Michael Jordan, right? So they see
Yeah.
this is what the person does. I see them doing it. I see the commission checks they're getting. I'm going to do what she's doing way more than any manager is going to tell me what to do. So there's a way to leverage that as well.
That's great. And that's a great angle as well, because I mean, in sports, it's a team game, and with sales, it can sometimes be quite a one man or one woman show, right? Sometimes, because it's ultimately you who are closing the deals, and you're responsible for your accounts. But is that also a characteristic of an A player, someone who is in it for the team? I guess you can have an A player mentality, but a real A player, would you say, is someone who really cares for the benefit of the team and wants to drive performance and so on?
I mean, more yes than no. The main difference there would be it's not necessarily a top performer. Again, a top performer is not always an A player, but to be an A player, you have to be a top performer. The gray area in between is maybe someone that's a top performer that's very selfish, but doesn't hurt the rest of the team. And I think you can see that a lot more now in the remote workplace being more prevalent and probably here to stay more than it ever has been. It's not as in the forefront where jealousy or greed could really determine, or I'm sorry, could be a detriment to the greater team. So I don't think it needs to be there, but it just can't hurt the team for someone to be a top performer and still an A player. Because an A player is also someone that's consistently good. And as long as it's not at the cost of the greater team, then yeah, they could still be an A player in my book.
Awesome. And my last question for you, Andrew, is what are the top 3 characteristics of an A player?
All right. So number 1, you have to be resilient, because in life, things always go wrong. In sales, things always go wrong. There's a bunch of things that you can't control. So I think you need to be resilient and absolutely fight through it. The second piece for a top performer, without question, you have to be motivated, and you have to find something to motivate you. Whether it's money, which is totally cool, right? A lot of people are motivated by money. Or it could be your family, or it could just be pride, or you like recognition. Those things typically change too. But for me, it was always like career path was my number 1 motivation when I was a direct seller. And then I achieved that goal through top performing. But then there's people who just want to stay in a sales role for 30 years and make as much money as possible. And that's cool too. They want freedom. They want autonomy, right?
Yeah.
So, resilience is definitely number 1. Motivation is number 2. And then number 3, I know this is probably kind of a weird answer, but I typically think an A player needs to be a likable person.
Okay.
For the reasons we talked about, you need to be likable enough where people want to buy from you. A lot of top performers get their business through partnerships, right? So your partners need to like you. And then again, it's not, an A player on a team, you can't be a detractor, right? So you got to be likable. So resilient, motivated, and likable would be 3 things I would look for to determine that next A player.